So, how should you feel about the CEO killer? And this, I disconnect very well from the mainstream mind. And when I'm talking about the mainstream mind, I'm talking about the news. I'm talking about opinion news. I'm talking about most of the popular podcasts. And it's interesting, and it filtered in because into my world just because there was different takes on it, and it was an interesting study because I saw, or what I've become aware of is that there is one side that is, thoughts and prayers and, oh my gosh, the family and the police putting, millions of dollars to go out and find this person. And on the other side, the interesting part was all these videos in support of this person. And it got me thinking about, what about the people like that don't know how to feel about things? Because I know I was one of those people. I knew I wanted to be a compassionate person. And so I was part of that mainstream mind. And I was always connecting to it to make my choice on like what I thought about things and how important it was. And it's so interesting to see people trying to figure out how you should feel about somebody. Somebody died, and then the story goes on the other side, well, this person is responsible for denying health insurance for lots of people and treatments that have killed people. So it kind of depends on like the story you're putting together on how you should feel about it. So should we be like, okay, let's start saying vigilante and have empathy for that point of view? And where do we point our empathy? And that's the interesting thing about the mainstream mind, is it's always just a who's the good guy. And it's all about the identities, like, if they're an atheist or if they're a theist or if you're agnostic, like it always requires humans to come in and say, what tribe am I part of? What label do I carry? And then it's like, and that's the interesting thing over these like last 10 years is how hard it has been for people to pick a side and then be for things. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes in and disappoints that identity. And then it's like, well, how do you feel about this now? And it's just this constant mind created morality. And this is how I look at it. And it's like, we sit there and we're like always saying, well, I want to be a compassionate person. I want to be loving. I want to be kind. So how should I feel about this? And that was the burden that I had all the time, was like, how do I see this? What's my opinion on this? And then I realized that it's all a game. It's all a mind created game of trying to figure out who the villain is and who the good guy is. And it's a virtual world. And so I look at it as like, where do you point empathy? Like, when does empathy actually become a thing? Is it when your tribe and your side wins? Can that possibly be it? And that's the interesting thing now, is that people will pick up an identity and then the next week, then somebody is canceled from that identity, and it's like, oh gosh, I got to drop this because now I'm not going to appear as being empathetic if I'm this. And so this really goes to like, why do we live in such a discombobulated world? Well, if you just look at it as the point that it's just a mind moral game. And so where does it actually drop down and actually become empathy that is meaningful. And then where does compassion come to play? So these are my thoughts on that. How should you feel about it? It's like I don't have to have empathetic feelings for it, because at the same time, this is just the newest thing that's put in front of me as what's an emotional game that can be played in the world, because at the same time there's lots of other things that I should be putting my empathy towards. And it's like, if we think in terms that concern is empathy, that I am supposed to be just anxious and worry, and that is me being a compassionate person, that doesn't go anywhere. So what's the answer? That's the question. That's the thing, is we've been talked out of our emotional guidance system, how we feel, how our sensations drive us. And with this mainstream mind, we're plugged into this virtual world where we're pitting minds after minds, and then sitting down in coffee shops and talking about this stuff to try to figure out who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. So what's the answer? What is real compassion? Well, this is how I understand it for myself. And this is what disconnecting from that story was dropping all of the identities. I didn't have to tell people I believe in God or I don't believe in God. I don't have to be ready for somebody to ask me that. It's like, I can be fluid, I can be dynamic. And that's my mind game now. I don't have to connect myself to an identity. I just can show up as myself and let other people tell me what I am and what I am not. People don't ask me for my opinion anymore. And that's the interesting thing, is that I was plugged into that mainstream mind, and my mind was always ready to tell people, okay, this is my opinion, this is what my label is. And then I recognized, when I started dropping those kind of things, people never ask me. They don't ask me those kind of questions. And now I have better terminology, and I actually had somebody ask me my opinion the other day, but I told them I don't do opinions. I do binions, because opinions been hijacked by the mainstream mind. And fact and opinion are no longer these separate terms. These are like, somebody holds an opinion, it's actually a fact. And binions are simply dynamic. And it's like, I can look at things from many different points of view. And that's what I'm doing in this video, is just sharing with you my point of view on how things work. And you know what? If you have a better perspective, I will take it. Because why wouldn't I want to have the best ride? Wouldn't I want to be more loving, more kind, more compassionate? So what is compassion? Well, empathy is an actual sensation. And it's the one thing that, that we get, is this hit when we see things that seem like, we don't want that to happen to people, and we don't want those things to happen to us. So it's a sensation that guides us, but it can be and remain at a very superficial level. It can stay up in the mind. I call it the mind heart. It's like, we pretend that our heart lives up here, and this is where compassion lives. But people actually do the work, and I don't even like saying the work, but they actually do the embodiment of these sensations. They take the trip, and it's not that far. It's from the mind into the actual heart. And how do you do that? Well, you deal with your own grief. You deal with the things that are difficult for you, the things that bring you strike empathy within you. And when you embody these things, you start to recognize that there's lots of sensations that have been hijacked. We have the way that I would describe this is, the mind heart wants to be nice. And I was the nice guy. I was the one that, would do nice things. But then I had to be honest with myself when I started to wake up to this stupidity that I was putting together, this mind heart that I had in my head, this idea of who I thought I was, and that I was a compassionate person. What I was really doing was having an expectation that if I was nice to people, they should be nice to me. And then when I started to embody these other sensations like kindness, started learning about boundaries, and I started to be kind and it was clear to people. That's what kindness does. I realized that the reward for being kind is its own reward because kindness feels good. And people oftentimes when you're kind will respond better, especially better than when you're nice. It's when you understand how the messed up part of the mind heart is the whole dysfunctional psychology of codependency and narcissism. So how do we find compassion? Well, we go in and we find and we embody the pain. We don't use these as stories. We don't create stories about my suffering. It's like people who have PTSD, oftentimes they create a story about it, and it's the first thing I want to talk about. And that's talking about it. Those are thoughts. Those are not the embodiment. And I'm not talking about that we shouldn't share these things with each other. But we should be sharing feelings, not the conclusions that come from the uncomfortable feelings. The uncomfortable feelings are for us to investigate for ourselves, to go in and feel and experience and allow them to adjust us and change our perspective, because they will change our perspective. When we take, there was a great idea around one of the things when I started doing personal boundaries training. The first thing that people oftentimes who don't do personal boundaries, they're usually nice people. And so they don't want to say mean things. Well, saying no is not a mean thing, but they've created this pattern of if I say no, people are going to be disappointed, people pleaser, the people are going to be disappointed, and that's going to be really hard for me. And so what we can do right there is like practice right off the bat. If you found, like, if you had 10 things that you had wished that you said no to in a particular day or a particular week, it's like take those 10 things and then go in and just pretend in your mind, imagine yourself saying no to those situations. And that can be uncomfortable. And that's exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring up the uncomfortableness of saying no. And then that's you dealing with it. That's you facing your fear. That's you facing and looking into and feeling into those sensations. And what you're really doing is embodying it. And so when we begin to embody those kind of things, that's where real embodied compassion comes. Because that's the mind heart goes around and tries to get credit for everything. And thinking, I'm a compassionate person. Let me show everybody how compassionate I am. When you can just hold compassion. And when you know what compassion is, when you've embodied compassion, you know what it is. And then when things come around like this, the shooter or whatever else is going to be on the news, is going to be something horrible, right? That's what the news is. You don't have to go to your mind heart. You can be like, I will just feel into that sensation of compassion, if that's what it feels right. And that's empathy. You can point that empathy towards the situation without being on a side of what's going on. You can just be like, wow, this is crazy. These are what these people are doing. And this is what's happening in the world. And they're just doing their thing. They're just playing their role in the world. And that's how you give back. You give back by putting it into your heart. And then you don't say things like, thoughts and prayers go out to you. That's a funny saying. Because it's like, you know how crazy people's minds are. It's like, I don't want their heart. I don't want their thoughts. I like my thoughts because I like my mind, and that's embodied. So I don't have to continually every day have this mind that's constantly reshuffling which side I am and which identities are winning. To have that kind of mind. So anyway, I thought this was an interesting societal kerfluffle, and I like to look at things from different perspectives. So hope you enjoyed this.